honestly, all I have to say is wow. This is the longest Maiden release to date, easily. Very, very close to 80 minutes long, I'm telling you. The band just keeps on getting longer and longer and longer, but you know what? This is not necessarily a poor thing. Whereas on Brave New World, we saw 2 tracks that eclipsed the 9-minute mark, and then we didn't see any tracks that eclipsed the 9-minute mark on Dance of Death, and then it kind of went a lot longer with A Matter of Life and Death, but not quite to that particular element. Now we have 3 songs, then 2, 3, that eclipse the 9-minute mark, including the finale, When the Wild Wind Blows, which actually comes up at just a second shy of 11 minutes, making it the longest Maiden song since Sign of the Cross back on the X Factor. Now, I've been talking heavily in the 2000s era Iron Maiden album reviews about the band's progression. They're kind of hinting towards musicianship, progressive sides, and of course, the fact that a lot of their music has now been centered around the fact that their intro is either very, very enthusiastic, either that or very, very different than the actual song itself, kind of building the story, almost be serving as a prequel, so to speak, such as if Star Wars didn't start with episode 4 or even episode 1. It actually started with episode -1/2, where instead of seeing perhaps Luke Skywalker in his earliest incantations as a little schmuck kid in a little schmuck town with his little schmuck aunt and uncle or whatever it was, you actually see Luke being born. Fuck! We do see that. We see that actually at the end of episode 3, but you know what I'm talking about. Same similar idea. It's almost like you're establishing the story by actually writing not only just chapter 1, however, a preface, so to speak. That's something that happens a lot on this album. It's something that's actually very cool about this album. Now, the first song that you heard off of The Final Frontier was, of course, El Dorado, which is track number 2 off of this particular release. And this is a song that the first time I heard it, I was a little concerned about. I really was. It wasn't exactly that it was a poor song. However, unlike A Matter of Life and Death, which had Dance of Death to kind of go by as a kind of a case in point, reference point, so to speak, trying to compare with A Matter of Life and Death is a lot more difficult than trying to compare from some of the songs from Dance of Death. As I said, it was an album that had a lot of good tracks, but a couple elements of filler. So, whenever I hear El Dorado, the very first thing I thought of was, it ain't bad. Could be worse. But it isn't A Matter of Life and Death. It didn't exactly fulfill that particular void that I've been waiting for now for 4 long, tedious years. However, whenever I pop in this record for the first time and listen to it, the very first thing that I'm greeted with is Satellite 15, The Final Frontier, which has a very electronic, a very different introduction to this particular track, something that's very unlike Maiden. We saw something semi-similar in Sign of the Cross, where it kind of begun very slowly and kind of built using a very dark and dank atmosphere in order to get into the point. However, to have it go to something completely electronic, so to speak, to really go with the theme of space travel, of being away from home, of being away from loved ones and away from everything, it's actually kind of a nice little idea, and it's a nice way to really begin this album. The Final Frontier song itself, which kicks in about halfway through, is no slouch itself. It's fantastic. It's a great opener. Yes, there is a lot of repetition of the idea that is centered within. However, once again, as I said with Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, this is in no way, shape, or form The Angel and the Gambler. It is a lot more creative, and it's a song that actually gets you just ready to go for this particular release. Funny thing about this is that it also does something that's even more interesting. Listening to this song actually somehow, some way, even though it's better than El Dorado, makes El Dorado sound better whenever you listen to it. Whenever I heard El Dorado by itself, I wasn't that impressed. However, whenever I heard it after hearing Satellite 15, The Final Frontier, for some strange reason, everything just sort of clicked. Almost as though that this progression from Satellite 15, The Final Frontier, into El Dorado made logical sense, and you actually sort of saw El Dorado's place on this particular record, and everything clicked. The light was finally turned on, so to speak. And actually, whenever you consider this, El Dorado is not really half bad of a track. It's actually pretty strong, and whenever you compare it to the, some would say the filler on Dance of Death, this actually is something that you could see as a strong moment even on that particular release. So, overall, can't really complain. Then you get into Mother of Mercy and Coming Home, and these 2 tracks, oh my gosh, love these tracks a lot. Mother of Mercy actually, for some strange reason, reminds me a lot of Blood Brothers. And Coming Home is kind of seen almost as a ballad to some purists of the music reviewing genre, which is very unique because the song really does kind of have a little bit of a power ballady feel to it, but at the same time it does still have that typical Iron Maiden sound to it. Then you get into The Alchemist, which is the shortest track in the album, at just under 4 minutes and 30 seconds long, and this is the one song where I'm kind of a little blasé about, really don't care about all that much. There's always seemed to be one or two of those on the last two Maiden releases, so it's no surprise. Now, this is a track that other Maiden purists will actually enjoy quite a bit. They'll, in fact, probably like this song a whole heck of a lot more than the latter half of the album. Why is this, you might ask? Because we then get into the last 5 tracks of the album, the last half, which is Isle of Avalon, Starblind, The Talisman, The Man Who Would Be King, and When the Wild Wind Blows, where no song is under 7 minutes and 30 seconds. In fact, the shortest of all those is 7:48, which is Starblind, which means that this particular part of the album actually eclipses... I'm trying to still do the math in my head, folks. I mean, this is how ridiculous this actually is. 26, that's 34. It actually eclipses the last 45 minutes of this near hour and 20-minute long release, which means that the meat of this, over half of this record, truly is these last 5 tracks, but it's actually more than that, which means that the first half obviously is a little bit shorter, which also means that this last half is going to have a lot of traditional Iron Maiden purists screaming, crying foul, because they seem to have this distaste and disdain for the new Iron Maiden. That definitely shows a lot of progression, that shows a lot of those hints that they are evolving and have constantly evolved and will continue to evolve even further into this classic realm of progressive meets new wave of British heavy metal. And really, whenever you look at this, there's no song here that you can really complain about, in my personal opinion. See, that's the problem. My personal opinion seems very jaded and almost seems somewhat non-objective toward this particular release. The way that I actually see this, however, is that I actually possess a little bit more of an open-mindedness to this particular style that Iron Maiden has been employing over the past couple of records. So, by proxy, perhaps because of my love of progressive music, not to mention my love of Iron Maiden, it's actually a match made in heaven for me. I'm actually somewhat seeing the marriage between heaven and hell, which is creating a perfect purgatory, where Iron Maiden is playing at all times, and I'm actually wondering why this is actually purgatory, because it sounds like heaven to me. The one song that everyone so far has been crying foul about has been When the Wild Wind Blows, the finale of this particular record. I thought I was going to have to relight that. You could see the smoke blowing, the wild wind of the smoke was blowing. A lot of people hate this song. They find this to be one of the most boring songs that Iron Maiden has ever put out. They actually compare it to Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, which, for one, I'm wondering why Maiden purists are considering this to be a terrible song, because, for one, it was a very successful single, and two, it's not that bad of a song. There are worse songs out there in Iron Maiden's catalog, folks. Take a look. Take a look in the 1990s and maybe even take a gander at Dance at Death. It really just depends on your perspective here. However, I am going to have to relate this. However, When the Wild Wind Blows is a fantastic song whenever you kind of examine the overall theme of this entire album, kind of being away from home, of being in space travel, the Armageddon theory, perhaps you could say. Listen to the lyrics, listen to the idea. Are the lyrics somewhat simplistic? Yes. Has the idea somewhat been done before by Iron Maiden? Absolutely. But there's an interesting argument that I'm going to present in just a couple of minutes. When the Wild Wind Blows is not that bad of a song at all. In fact, it's a fitting finale and a fantastic track. It employs something that Iron Maiden has always been known for, however, they have not been known for it particularly in this regard, which is atmosphere. Atmosphere is something that you typically hear me talk about with bands such as Agalloch, Maiden of the Well, avant-garde bands for the most part. To hear them use this in both the last track and the first, where you actually hear the blowing of what you could conceive to be the wild wind, is much akin to the Satellite 15 track, where you hear the electronic introduction that launches into the Final Frontier, the title track, that is track number 1. And the song itself is actually really, really passionate, really awesomely done, very well sung by Bruce. Now, there are some moments on this album where Bruce actually seems like he is trying to transform this into an opera of some sorts. As opposed to going over the top in his typical traditional style, he actually seems a little bit strained, and that he's using some new ideas to kind of take away from the idea that he and the rest of the band are certainly aging. This is not necessarily a bad thing, folks. This is once again something that people will lament and bitch about and moan constantly. But the fact of the matter is that you're not going to always be what you are forever and ever and ever. Ozzy Osbourne on his album Scream may still sound like Ozzy Osbourne. But if you see Ozzy Osbourne at Ozfest, you're going to realize that within 20 or 30 minutes of his set, he's going to sound like a hot, wet bag of ass. Believe me, this is something that happened over 7 years ago whenever I saw him perform solo on the main stage of Ozfest, and proceeded to say, in a much more lamented fashion, he's just not what he used to be. However, now it's reaching the point of ridiculousness. Come on! Gus G does not a good Ozzy album make whenever Ozzy Osbourne still thinks that he's God. And the fact that some fans still think this, but yet will bitch and lament about the fact that Bruce Dickinson does not have the air raid siren, but is instead deciding to disguise it somewhat with thespian antics, is ridiculous. It is completely hypocritical and retarded. And you should re-examine exactly what you think and believe. Now finally, the theory. A lot of people have saying The Final Frontier will be Iron Maiden's final album because, of course, of the exhibition of the usage of the word "final" in the album name itself. There's two things that may actually suggest this to be absolutely true. One, of course, When the Wild Wind Blows really sounds like the finale of a band that is really right there at the edge of saying goodbye. This is something you could also perhaps say for the legacy off of A Matter of Life and Death, but of course that wasn't the case. The second brimming argument is track number 1 itself, Satellite 15, more notably. Satellite 15, is that random? Or are they really actually just giving you the clue that this is their 15th album and they have reached the final frontier of their career? There's going to be speculation about this for years, I'm sure, until there either exists an idea or a release date for a 16th release, or until finally the band just does say goodbye. Either way, do not draw too much speculation into this, do not draw too much ire, and do not draw too much of your attention into this. Draw your attention towards the fact that this is actually a very well-crafted album. It's very fantastically done, and a lot of the naysayers are naysayers because they really just wish it was 1986 again. It's not. It's been 24 years. I'm 26, folks. I was 2 in 1986. I think I've changed a little bit, too. Don't you agree? The band's been around for 35 years in various incantations. Of course, the first album came in 1980, so they've been making albums for 30 years. For crying out loud, give the guys a break. They're not all going to be gems, but this one's not a shitfest either. This is a very, very solid album, one that I enjoy a lot. I've enjoyed it for the past week, and now that I have the Mission Edition, you guys might not see me for a long time because I'll probably be enjoying it even more so. I'll be finding more subtle innuendos in there, and I may have an Armageddon theory about this band in one day that I'll present just for comedy. Enjoy the music. Really. Because let's face it, Iron Maiden is a band that is still making breathtaking albums, and they are still exploring their sound. And they're doing this with the core and the cast that made them what they are, with the addition of Janet Garris. They don't need to hire new guitar players that are in other bands that are more successful, or should be more successful, should I say, just to make them sound young again. Iron Maiden's doing it the old-fashioned way. By manning up, nutting up, and because they're just that damn good. 8.5 out of 10. No dispute. Up the Irons week has now reached its conclusion. Thank you guys, to all of you that have watched all 15 of these videos. I thank you. If this is the first of the 15 that you are watching, you have a lot of work to do. Turn back the clock and begin the journey anew. This is Cover Killer saying thank you once again. And it's time for me to enjoy this album all the more.